here talking about taxes and government, our favorite topics. I know it's exciting you, but if you remember our last lesson, we're putting a positive spin on it. We're showing you how taxes and government are necessary. Yes, there can be corruption and too much taxes, but we want to talk about the nature of these things first so we can understand what they're for, how the positive things that come from taxes and government. Now, our last lesson we learned about taxes. Now we're going to talk about government. Taxes and government have to be discussed together. They go hand in hand. So the question is, what is government? Now, based off of what we just learned in our last lesson about taxes, we can simply say that government is the power to collect taxes. Now, essentially, that's true, but let's dig a little deeper. Let's take a look at the origin of the word. The English language was influenced by the French language, and the verb to govern is an old French word. And the French word came from the Romans, who borrowed it from the Greek, so the word has a long history. In Greek, to govern meant to steer a ship, and from this it came to mean to guide, to direct, to command. It means to issue orders and directions for the common good. Tyranny or slavery is foreign to this concept. To govern has nothing to do with tyrants commanding slaves. Now, government is sometimes referred to as the ship of state, and that's because, as we have seen, the Greek word contains the idea of steering a ship. Have you ever been on a boat? Well, the driver and the passengers are equally concerned that the boat travels safely. If the boat sinks, the passengers and the captain sink too. So the captain and the passengers must float or sink together. And this is a wonderful way to think of government. We're in this together. We float or sink together. So let's stay afloat, shall we? Now, the state is also referred to as a commonwealth. The word commonwealth comes from the words common and weal, W-E-A-L. Common means that which all people share and have an equal interest in, and weal means the sound state of a person or thing, a state which is prosperous, happiness. So a commonwealth is a place where the happiness and prosperity of all is promoted. So government is directing and managing the affairs that concern everyone alike. To accomplish this, everyone has to chip in. That's what our tax is for. Without taxes, there would be no government. Without government, our lives, our freedoms, and the things we work for would never be safe. Without government, happiness and prosperity would be hard to achieve and maintain. Remember this, anarchy is the worst thing that could ever happen to a people. So the question is, who steers this ship of state? Government is necessary, and that means taxes are necessary. We just learned that. You can't have one without the other. People in a society create a government to provide mutual protection, and that means we need to hire people to manage the public affairs so that the rest of us can live in a peaceful society and create a prosperous economy through hard work. So who do we choose to run the government? Our representatives, remember, will have to determine the public needs and what it will cost to meet them. And that means they will set the tax rates. Too little taxes means they aren't wise enough to assess our proper needs. Too much taxes means they are using public money for unjust purposes. Always follow the money. So we need to make sure our elected officials are both wise and good. And remember this, government is legal force. The government is granted authority in certain areas. We call that a jurisdiction. Government has the legal power to take away some of our private property for public needs. Government won't last long unless it can raise money, and that is why it is imperative that civil servants be wise and virtuous. Since they are clothed with the authority to use force, we should make sure they are smart enough to do their jobs efficiently and good enough so as not to abuse their power. Now, what would happen if I stole your iPad instead of paying for it? You'd have to face the consequences in court. Stealing is taking someone's private property without giving them your private property in return. Now, taxes aren't theft. Government takes your private property and gives you something in return. We pay taxes for good government. Without good government, our lives and property wouldn't be safe. But it can get to a point where taxes are like theft. We are headed for disaster when elected officials forget what they are hired to do. When this happens, they unjustly tax us to spend it on whatever they please. They use the spoils of taxation to increase political influence and other illegitimate purposes. And that means that taxpayers aren't receiving in return for their taxes legitimate services which benefit everyone. That is legalized theft. And at this point, as I said, taxes become theft. However, we can't call the police on public officials like we can do when someone robs a store. So what can we do? Well, we use the illustration of the ship of state. If those steering the ship are navigating dangerously, it's time for someone else in the ship to be chosen to take the helm. And that's what elections are for. And this is why we are studying the principles of freedom. Not everyone can steer the ship of state, but everyone should have some knowledge of the basic principles of freedom and good government in order to select the best men for the job. Remember, things are constantly being spoken of in legislative assemblies. And if they're not settled in accord with knowledge, they'll be settled in accord with ignorance, which would be disastrous to everyone. Remember, we're in this ship of state together. We sink or sail together. And I have to say, it's a pleasure sailing with you. So let's learn these principles together. This is Dan Sheridan. I gotta run. Thanks for spending time with me. Remember this, be good to one another because we're in this together.